What's up, guys? Merry Christmas to you from me, the Carrot Man. What's going on? This is the Carrot Poker Podcast coming at you on Wednesday, the 16th of December. It's not quite Christmas yet, but I'll probably be taking a week off from the podcast next week, I would imagine, just because I'll have Christmas things going on and I've got like a little holiday and stuff coming up and all these things. So probably be back after Christmas with the next episode after this one. So I thought I'd wish you guys a good Christmas and awesome festive period right now. We're continuing today with the series of The Grinder's Manual, my book that's coming out soon. It's been 6 months now since I started this Carrot Poker podcast. I've been really enjoying making it. Hope you guys have been finding it useful. Continue to keep leaving me feedback at admin@carrotcorner.com. Please continue to keep sharing this podcast with all your friends and poker cronies and study groups, communities, etc. And yeah, we'll hopefully be bringing you another 52 episodes, one per week in 2016. So let's move on to the second part of the c-betting chapter now, which is more about thinking about c-bet ranges as a strategy rather than just thinking about c-betting in a vacuum. 2 episodes ago, when we did the last one of this series, in episode number 23, I believe, we talked a lot about the c-bet factors that made a c-bet a good or bad idea in a vacuum. Those were factors such as how much equity we have in the pot, which reduces the amount of fold equity we need, how dry the texture is, which makes our opponent fold more in general because they miss it more, and things like that, our future street prospects, how multi-way the pot is. All these kind of things, when we consider them, they are relevant to how we should play our range, but there are very much vacuum factors in the way that we were considering them last time. When I say that we want to think about c-betting and branch off into a more strategic sense of c-betting, what I'm talking about is we want to think about what our c-bet range looks like, whether we can actually get away with putting money into the pot with that wide of a range. It could be that you might have a profitable c-bet in a vacuum or whatnot, but it could be that c-betting is not going to be the best long-term plan with that part of your range. It could be that it may be slightly higher EV to c-bet the nut flush draw with really good showdown value than it is to check call it, but actually check calling it is better long-term EV because it bolsters that part of your check call range and puts flushes in there that can make you a bunch of money on those runouts and just protect the rest of your range and increase the EV of your whole range. So I want to think today about what our c-bet range looks like in different spots, what c-bet strategies we're going to look at, so not just one hand in a vacuum, does it meet X, Y, and Z factors. Want to think about what the shape of our c-bet range is, whether we can justify c-betting that wide over the long term or whether we can get exploited, how defensive it is. And I want to think about range advantage primarily as well, which is a very important thing to think about on the flop. So I'll start there. Range advantage is the concept of how well your range is doing compared to your opponents. Generally speaking, a range has advantage over another range when that range is uncapped, but the other range is capped. So an uncapped range against a capped range will usually, but not always, have range advantage. For example, let's start off with a situation, very common one in fact, where we min open the button. In a normal 6-max cash game, there are regs in the blind, so we have no reason to 3x our button range. We spoke about all of this in the first couple of episodes where we talked about pre-flop stealing. So we've gone for a min open size. As a result, we're getting flatted very wide by the big blind after the small blind has folded. Let's say the big blind is a reg, and the two of us go to the flop of king 8 two-tone, or rainbow. Let's call it rainbow, make it even drier. So on this board, if you consult your c-bet factors in a vacuum, they're going to tell you something like, okay, well, this is a flop on which Hero has not so much equity with like a semi-bluffing hand, but that semi-bluffing hand, or I should say just bluffing hand, like maybe as like Queen 10, is still a plus EV c-bet because Villain doesn't have much equity either. Villain's not going to connect well with this dry board, so the vacuum factors are going to tell you this is like a good c-bet spot even though you don't have much pot equity. I want to expand that now to think about range versus range. Hero has immense range advantage on this flop, and the reason for that is that while he can have ace-king and possibly king-queen, his opponent, well, he has ace-king, king-queen, his opponent pretty much will never have ace-king here if he's playing any kind of reasonable 3-bet game pre-flop, because he'll be 3-betting that hand and may not have king-queen suited either. Hero will have all of the sets and probably all of the 2 pairs as well, apart from 8 deuce suited. He'll have like king 8 suited and king 2 suited, whereas Villain may 3-bet bluff those or even fold. We don't really know. Hero can have king 8 off and king deuce off sometimes, depending how wide he's opening the button, but certainly I would think king 8 off is very much in Hero's range, and these hands are possibly not in big blind's range. So Hero has on the button a much stronger range on this flop than Big Blind does. Hero has a lot of air as well, but so does Big Blind, and relatively speaking, Big Blind's air will actually make up a bigger portion of his range than Hero's will of his. Hero can have pocket aces, ace king, all these hands, whereas Big Blind can't, so Hero's value range on the flop is much bigger than Big Blind's, king X and stuff like that, relative to the rest of each player's range, basically. So Hero has range advantage, there's no question about it. What does this mean? What are the implications of this range advantage? Does it mean anything in reality as to what Hero's long-term strategic plan should be? Well, yes, it does. It means that Villain is going to be very hard pushed to actually find a counter strategy that works. He can try to over-defend his range on the flop if he thinks Hero's c-betting too wide, and indeed, Hero will be c-betting very wide here in practice. So Villain can say, okay, the button's probably c-betting very wide here, like maybe even his whole range, therefore I'm going to start fighting back more. But the problem is, he doesn't have any reasonable semi-bluffing hands to fight back with, and Hero just has a strong hand way more often than he does. So, while in practice it might work against someone who's too tight and doesn't play anywhere near GTO in this spot, it might work to actually just bluff raise a hand with no equity. In doing so, Big Blind will be bloating his bluffing proportion way out of whack, and therefore Hero is well advised, when he doesn't know the villain here, to defend pretty damn liberally on the flop and defend a lot of his c-bets, not just the times he has a pair, but when he has like ace queen, ace jack and stuff as well, because these are really good hands to defend against a range that could be very wide and very bluffy. So the point is that because villain flops a value raising hand so infrequently on the flop, he's just going to really suffer by playing this strategy. Hero's going to be able to defend, just because Hero's c-bet range is weak per se, in absolute hand strength, it contains a lot of high card, a lot of bottom pair or whatever, it doesn't matter because villain's range is even weaker. So it could be that if Hero c-bets the flop and gets raised and Hero has ace 10 on king 8-2, that's actually a hand that's a clear call, given the read that villain just can't have very many value hands at all when he raises this flop. And if Hero wants to play in a balanced way and make sure that he's not overfolding his range to this counter adjustment of villain, like raising him, then he needs to make sure that he's calling the top whatever percent based on villain's risk and reward when villain puts money into the pot. So if villain raises this flop, he might be risking X to win Y, and therefore we need to divide his X into his X plus Y, his risk into his risk plus reward, and that gives us the required fold equity percentage for villain if he didn't have any equity. But guess what? Due to this very dry texture, villain is very rarely going to have any equity when he raises. So his required equity on a bluff check raise is going to be very, very close to the raw required equity value. There's not going to be much of a reduction possible for villain to make based on equity he has in the hand. He is going to need just about as many folds as the math tells him he does to make that check raise in a vacuum. So Hero can make villain indifferent there to bluffing very easily. It just means that he needs to be aware of his own range, and he has to play his range here if he doesn't know what villain's doing, and he can't just fold because he has high card. Oh, I have jack, I have ace high, I have to fold to the check raise. No, actually you don't, because a balanced strategy that's close to GTO will have you defending a lot of your c-bet range, because the best strategy here is for you to c-bet 100% of hands as the button, as Hero on the button. So why is that defensible? Because of this range advantage, we just have so many combos we can call with here that villain can't have when he raises, and that allows us to float much wider, to call more ace high, more weaker showdown value. Villain is just going to be out of position, building a big pot, and if we're just playing our range in a balanced way, he's not going to be able to do anything about the fact that we're c-betting our whole range. It doesn't matter that our range is weak, because our range is not absolute, like I said before, it's relative to villain's range. So this is a situation on King 8 Deuce Rainbow where we should just c-bet our whole range. But what size should we use here? Well, we should go very small. The reason for this is that we are basically making a lot of money by c-betting. Villain can't be calling this flop super wide. Like, he's just going to really struggle to make a call out of position with no initiative, letting us realize our equity over later streets, plus EV with a hand like Queen High here. Like, in general, it's going to be very difficult, assuming we're barreling some turn cards as a bluff and some rivers as a bluff. It's going to be very, very difficult for him to make that flop call plus EV. This means that villain has no choice but to overfold his range on the flop. He's basically strategically forced to overfold his range on the flop because his range is worse than ours. It's like if we go into a fight and I have a shotgun and you have a little rusty screwdriver. That's probably bad for me that's rusty because I can get like tetanus from that. Maybe it's not rusty, whatever. It's an old, weak screwdriver anyway, and I've got a shotgun. You're not advised to trade me blow for blow and try to like make me indifferent to shooting you, because you can't make me indifferent to shooting you, because my weapon is much bigger. It's always going to be plus EV for me to fire my shotgun at you if I want to win this fight, just like it's always going to be plus EV for me to c-bet this flop when my range is so much stronger than yours. So if you want to go running around and wielding the rusty screwdriver at me to exploit the fact that I'm always shooting the shotgun, you can do that. By the end of the day, I still have a shotgun, and sometimes that might malfunction and I'll have to fold on the flop. But as long as I just shoot you often enough with the hands in my range that are decent, that constitute the top X%, then I'm going to be protected against your play, and I am still fully justified in c-betting my range on the flop in its entirety. Why is it bad to check the flop? Well, here's another thing. The mediocre hands that I have here, because the second card on this board is an 8 and not, say, a jack. I really have to sneeze. Hope that's not going to happen in the middle of the podcast. I think it's going away. If I randomly sneeze, excuse me. Happens. Anyway, so because the middle card here is an 8, it means that my showdown value that's like middle pair or bottom pair is very low, right? You have 2 overcards to that showdown value very, very often on this flop. So when I have like Queen 8, you have a jack, you can hit a 9, a 10, a jack, an ace, and you can outdraw me pretty easily. That's like 12 outs if you hold both of those cards. So, or both of 2 of those cards, I should say. So what that means is that even my mediocre hands, it's not only the case that I want to c-bet my whole range because I have range advantage. I also want to do it because the mediocre hands in my range actually seek protection here, or a lot of them do. Something like King 5 could check, but I don't want to make a checking range that's just only consisting of King 5, King 6, and like weak kings, because that's just extremely unbalanced and easy to play against. And just being face up, you can just like never stab the turn. You just know that you can just continue to check fold in the hand, and I'm not making you indifferent to stabbing the turn. I'm making stabbing the turn really, really bad for you. So I wouldn't want to adopt this weird range where I'm just checking back like King X and nothing else on the flop. So because of that, I would have to be checking other things too if I wanted to be balanced on the flop. I'd have to check my vulnerable hands, like middle pair, which is not desirable. I'd have to give up some air sometimes so that I'm not always calling the turn after I check back flop. And I don't want to do that either. So I just think that I have a really plus EV c-bet with air here in a vacuum, and I don't think there's a long-term way in which you can do anything about it if I c-bet all my air. So I want to c-bet everything. It's a logical conclusion to this spot, and I want to size smaller here because you can't do anything about my strategy anyway. Your calls don't get all that much more plus EV when I size small. They get a little bit more plus EV, but where this play really shines, this small sizing, is that the times you actually have a good hand, the times you have King X or 8X, you have a part of your range you're not folding on the flop, I'm basically going to be spewing way less money with all my terrible 0 equity hands. Like I'm c-betting pocket 2s here, the hand has 2 outs to improve. I'm c-betting 3-4 suited here, the hand has like no outs to improve against your calling range at all. Therefore, when you actually call me, I would rather have not lost very much money since I have such terrible equity. And since I think you have to fold a lot anyway, and you're not going to be able to do anything about this due to your range disadvantage, I need to bet small to give the big part of my range, the bulk of it, which is crap basically, a better price on its bluff so that when it gets called it's not losing money to the stronger hands in your range that you can call me with out of position here. So that's that spot kind of broken down into a range versus range strategic analysis. It's very different to the kind of analysis we were doing before when we're thinking about factors in a vacuum, because we're concerned more with the long-term way in which 2 players sort of make adjustments against each other in the long term, and we're thinking outside the vacuum there. And even when we think outside the vacuum, we see that Hero's play is not just vacuum plus EV as we knew it was when we c-bet 4-5 suited on this board. We know it's plus EV from the vacuum factors, but we think that it's long-term defensible as well because we've now thought about our range and we've realised that we are actually fine here and villain doesn't have a route to really exploiting us. Let's switch the situation around though, and now let's say that the flop is King Jack 8 instead of King 8-2. Now villain connects with this flop a lot better. We do have range advantage still, but not by quite such a large margin because he has most of the King X and Jack X that we have here. And yeah, sure, we still have hands like aces and we still have hands like ace king where he doesn't. We still have range advantage, but he does. His Jack X and King X are a fair amount of his flop range. He's hitting this flop with a higher percentage of his range than he is the King 8 deuce, and therefore air makes up a less significant part of his flop range now, and ours as well, but it kind of decreases the margin of range advantage that we have on this flop. So we are still wielding a range advantage here, but it's not really enough to c-bet absolutely everything, because our fold equity goes down now, and now villain has so many more hands he can call flop with that he can actually start defending and floating if we start c-betting way too much. And I think that we could c-bet this flop with our whole range. It's kind of close King Jack 8, but I think we usually can't. especially if it's two-tone, because he has like the flush draws and things and stuff that help him defend more, like backdoor draws and things like that. But I think that we're going to struggle here if we start c-betting everything now. I think we're going to be left on the turn with too much weak equity, because in this spot, on King Jack 8, we actually have more zero equity hands than Villain does. We're probably opening a lot of like scabby low cards that he's not defending in the big blind, and therefore relatively we do have range advantage still, but the bottom part of our range is much worse than the bottom parts of Villain's range. They're likely bad, but they have a bit more equity than, like, he's probably not opening. He's not flatting like 5-3 suited as likely as we are to open it on the button. I guess our button range will be a bit wider than his flatting range, probably. Depends, sizing thing. Like, if it's a min open, not by such a big deal, but if this was like 2.5x or 3x, we'd open to be quite a big difference there at the bottom of our ranges. So we don't have as much in the way of range advantage here, but I guess more to the point, our range now doesn't like favour betting all the time, because we have a lot of hands that are just actually like not very plus EV to bet, because we have hands like Jack 10 now that betting doesn't make a lot of sense with, because when they get called they're usually behind, and they can bluff catch very effectively, and they're much higher EV checks in a vacuum than they are bets when I have Jack 10 off here. So because I now have this whole host of hands that are not as vulnerable, I don't need to protect. Remember, we talked about showdown value last time. I have a lot more stable as opposed to vulnerable showdown value now that I have hands like Jack 10 and middle pair and abundance. Now I'm not so bothered about betting my whole range. Now I'm actually wanting to develop a checking range. I want to check back and give up with the absolute worst hands in my range, or maybe delay my c-bet to the turn or river and take the pot away then when Villain's shown a lot more weakness by checking multiple times. What I don't want to do is just like shovel money into the pot with like pocket 2s here, or that's a set, like pocket 3s, or like, I don't know, a terrible hand like ace 4 off, when I can just check, give up that hand, and then I have enough checkbacks in my range to call turn with to make Villain indifferent to stabbing turn. I can have a balanced checking strategy on this flop, and my range likes that because it does want to check that flop a fair amount with weak kings, with jacks, with pocket queens, pocket 10s. It wants to check back and call one street with these hands, at least. So my whole strategy changes on this flop just due to the nature of my showdown value, what my range wants, what various parts of it want to do, the decrease in range advantage I have over Villain, that kind of thing. We could take this spot a step further now, and we could move this spot to blind versus blind, and we can say now heroes in a small blind c-betting against the big blind on King Jack 8 Rainbow. Now it's even worse. Why? Because, well, okay, we still have the same range advantage, but because Villain has position now, all of his floats are necessarily higher EV. This means that he's going to be able to take even more hands now and start over-defending his range if we c-bet too wide, and he can exploit us now because, like I say, our range advantage is not huge here. We're out of position, so his floats are now actually, he has a plus EV route to defending with a lot more hands. Remember I said at the start of this podcast on King 8 Deuce Rainbow, when we're in position, what's he going to do with his queen high, backdoor flush draw? It's not going to be a very profitable call for him as long as we're barreling enough on the turn and river. But here now he has position, it's a much more profitable call, and you can probably float, even on King 8 Deuce, you can probably float like Queen 10 backdoor flush draw there profitably. And especially on King Jack Deuce, he's going to have a lot more hands that he can float profitably because his equity is just higher. So if we take a hand like Ace 4 and just c-bet the very bottom of our range there, in terms of, that's not the bottom of our range, that's an overcard, like Jack 4 or something, that's a pair on King Jack Deuce, 10-4, there we go, that's pretty bad, or like 9-4 or something suited if we randomly opened that, or whatever. I'm not doing a very good job here of picking like the actual bottom of our range in game, but it could be some just terrible like ragged Queen X or something like that suited that we open with no backdoor flush draw. You get the picture, that kind of stuff. So if we c-bet that, we're then just c-betting a really weak, wide, airy range on a board that our opponent's actually doing quite well on and has position. He can punish that. So now we need a checking range, and we need a more substantial check fold range. Our give up percentage is going to be a lot higher on this texture out of position, King Jack 8 out of position, way higher than it would be in the first texture, King 8 Deuce in position. Position is a bad factor. It means that we need to check fold more. We can't win as many pots. Money flows to the left for a reason. People in position now just have higher EV plays, and therefore they should win more pots. And so we need to respect that. We need to fold more of our range, but we can still balance our range. It just means that we need to make sure that we're check calling a good amount of hands to compensate for those hands we're check folding. Now, we need to make Villain kind of indifferent to stabbing at us. He is going to have equity and stuff as well. So for now, I'm going to give you a rough guideline. If you want to check about 50%, if you want to check and call about 50% of the time that you check the flop, that's reasonable. It probably makes Villain have some, actually that gives Villain some really profitable stabs. You probably want to go, a little bit higher than that in terms of check calling. So you want to be check calling more often than not, when you check that flop, probably. It's kind of hard to do out of position there. You're going to have to like get as close to that as you can. But just make sure that you're check calling a good amount of hands. Make sure you're not check folding the flop like 60% of the time you check. Because if you do that, villain can take any 2 cards, bet 2/3 pot, and be printing money because he only needs 40% fold equity. So try and check call a lot of hands in this texture. Have a substantial check call range. It's a big leak here, blind versus blind, that people make to actually just c-bet all their good hands, check fold all their air, think that they're playing well. They're just getting exploited because I'm sitting there in the big blind just stabbing any 2 cards at them, laughing, raking in all the money. So check call a wide range there. Check fold a fairly wide range as well. Do c-bet, but c-bet polarized. Because you have these hands in the middle that want to check call, like your King X and Jack X, your c-bet range is necessarily more polar. That's to say it has strong hands for value and then just bluffs that could have equity, but they're not made hands. And so your sizing there out of position should actually be bigger because you've got a polarized range and you need fold equity, and your bluffs should be going, you need more fold equity out of position. Your bluffs want that. The bigger your sizing is, the more hands you can actually bluff. Strategically speaking. So you kind of want to go ahead and size much bigger in that spot. Have a polarized c-bet range between like good King X plus and then bluffs. And make sure you're not bluffing too much, so you're check folding some, but make sure you're not c-betting too depolarized, and make sure you're check calling a lot of your decent hands on the flop as well. And maybe even some very good hands as well that have the board crushed, like pocket kings or whatever, or king jack. You'd consider check calling those as well, just to mix things up and give a bit of balance to your checking range and a bit of strength to it. So anyway, that's like an introduction to the theory of c-betting or not c-betting, and dividing your range up on the flop as a pre-flop raiser, depending on board texture, how wet or dry it is, what your range looks like, how severe range advantage or disadvantage is, and then also think about your position and how that sort of helps or hinders you to get away with c-betting a wide range. So hopefully that's good food for thought. We'll move on and do probably one more on c-betting next week and talk about a few more different c-bet situations, and then we'll move on to the next chapter, which is value betting. After that, very important skill. Have an awesome Christmas. Contact me if you want to leave feedback or get in touch for some coaching over the new year at admin@carrotcorner.com. I'll be taking on students in the new year, hopefully aiming to take on as many as possible, so do get in touch with me as soon as you can if you want to look into some private coaching. And the website, as always, is carrotcorner.com. Email admin@carrotcorner.com. Hope to hear from you guys soon, and good luck at the tables. Hopefully you'll get some good fish bashing in over the festive season, because as you know the games are going to be full of people drunk having a good time, as they should, but that does create some spots for us evil poker players who like to sit there sober and prey on the fish, or even have a few beers and prey on the fish. Anyway, Spin Characters, take it easy, have a very good Christmas and an awesome New Year. Speak to you soon.